We talked about how can we provide for the proper conditions for integration upstream. And now we're going to talk about which are the conditions for integration to be effective in the countries where you get. I was saying that it's difficult to compare Canada with Italy. As I was listening to the Canadian experience, I felt that people that follow immigration policies in Italy, when they listen to what is happening in Canada, feel very sorry for our country, because the theme of integration in particular is hardly ever incorporated in a structural manner in our own immigration policies. As I said, it's difficult to draw parallels, draw comparisons. Well, Canada is a country which consists of immigrants. Well, Italy has immigration which started 30, 35 years ago. But I'd like to say to the Canadians who are here today that in Italy we still talk about immigration as if it were some sort of an emergency situation. Well, it's not just a form of words which is being used by the press or the politicians. That is very much related to the sort of position and attitude that people have. Canada plans immigration and talks about managed migration, while Italy doesn't have any sort of planning in that respect. Our condition is a very difficult one because of where we live, because of the fact that we are in a position where we get flows, migratory flows from Africa, the sea, but it's always very upsetting. It's quite upsetting for us to see that we always use the same bureaucratic approach for people that require a specific certificate or sort of want to file an application to open a factory in Italy. And so that takes a long time, and there isn't much of an attitude to try and help you out. And the same occurs when there are many asylum applications, and you need to set up a local structure that would consider such asylum applications in a shorter lapse of time. But basically, they're being sort of considered 2 years since the early submission. So you have asylum seekers, applicants for asylum that are still waiting for an answer, determination of their request in a year and a half. And also in terms of the centers, CIS, which are spread all over Italy, which are somewhat badly organized and not properly controlled, and in terms of integration, more often than not, are not doing a good job, both in terms of teaching the language, training, skills training, or sort of integration in society. And as is always the case in Italy, what happens is that we also see that there are some excellent examples, some of which are so good that are being followed by other countries. So it's a bit part of our sort of DNA that we are very creative. This afternoon, we have some colleagues from Italy, then from Canada, from Ontario. They will share with us their experience, and they will share with us their success stories and their failures and their best practices. So what is the goal that we have in mind with this meeting, to try and come up with some suggestions as to how we can define integration as being effective, on what basis, what's the yardstick for that. We have a video by Naheed Kurban Nenshi, the mayor of Calgary. I'd like to show the video right away. Sono il sindaco Mayor Nenshi, sono il sindaco di Calgary.
And on pluralism and on people who have come here from all over the world to seek opportunity. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person because I would love to further this conversation with you around immigration, around integration, around pluralism, and around opportunity. But I thought I might share with you a few thoughts by video around some of the things that make Canada so successful, and Calgary in particular so successful, in terms of how we think about immigrants. Of course, I know that in Italy you have been dealing with an unprecedented issue of migration, of refugees fleeing the most abject horror, and you found it difficult as a community to figure out how to manage that best. Certainly that is something that we are familiar with in Canada. Our numbers may be different in terms of our refugee to immigrant mix, but we have been a place that by definition has had to be welcoming for most of our history. It's not to say we've been perfect. Certainly we've had exclusionary laws in the past. Certainly we have had shameful incidents in the past, and sometimes those continue even today. But Canada is based on a theme of sanctuary, on a theme of being a place with open arms and open hearts, welcoming people from around the world. The experience with the recent discussion around Syrian refugees is, I think, instructive. During our last federal election, late last year, the issue of immigration and particularly of Syrian refugees came up as it had all over the world, particularly when we saw those heartbreaking images of young Alan Kurdi washed up on the beach. But something interesting happened in Canada, which is that the debate very quickly in our federal election became a debate on which party could be more welcoming, which party could help more people in the world. And I don't think that's similar to how the debate unfolded in many different parts of the world. But certainly it was a difficult debate. And after the terrorist attacks in Paris, it took on a hard-edged tone, a nervousness about security and about how we were going to accommodate people coming to this country who might not share the values that we share in this country. In many ways, that debate was an unhelpful one. You know, as I've said many times, if I had a French passport, as all of the attackers in Paris did, if I had an Italian passport, I could be in the downtown of any Canadian city in 7 or 8 hours. Would it make sense for me to actually try and hide sleeper agents in refugee communities where it could take dangerous crossings across water, or it could take many, many months, if not years, for those families to end up in our countries? It just doesn't make sense. That said, that's not really my point. My point is that certainly we had our debates as Canadians around how many people to accept, when to accept them, how quickly to accept them, what kind of security screening we do. But the most common question that I heard, and I continue to hear from everyday citizens, is that most Canadian of questions, that most Calgarian of questions, and that question is, how can I help? I have so many stories of everyday citizens who said to me, look, these families are coming, and it is incumbent on us as Canadians to ensure that they have the best possible start in their new lives as Canadians. I was recently at a school with very young children, and they said, when refugee students come here, they're not going to speak English well, so what can we do? These are 9, 10, 11-year-olds. What can we do to help our new classmates learn English better? The kindergarten students, 5 years old, were working on making welcome cards so that their new classmates felt welcome in their community. And they don't do that just for Syrian refugees. They do it for all the new children who end up in their schools. So how does that happen? I would argue to you that you need to work on this at 3 levels. I call them the 3 Ps. Policy, programs, people. At the level of policy, that really is for governments to decide. How many people do we accept? What kind of screening procedures do we have in place? How do they arrive? How do we help them integrate at the beginning? The second, programs, is really around communities. What kind of language training programs, Italian or English or French language training, do we offer to people when they come? How do we help integrate them into the workforce? What do we do around ensuring that their university degrees that are earned in other countries are still valid here, that they can work in their existing profession, that it's not just for the kids to have a great education, but also for the adults to be able to contribute meaningfully to the community. The third P is the most important one, and that is people. And that really is around the everyday reception that everyday people give to newcomers to our community. We're lucky in Canada because all of us, with the exceptions of our First Nations people, can trace our ancestry to immigrants to this country. And we know how we would have liked to have been treated when we arrived, or our grandparents arrived, or our great-grandparents arrived. And we work hard to try and treat people the same. It doesn't always work. Even here in Calgary, in this bastion of pluralism, we've had some hateful acts, some anti-immigrant graffiti. But what's been much more interesting is the community response. So for example, we had some very badly spelt anti-immigrant graffiti show up on a train station wall in the middle of the night. And these young men in their 20s saw this and were so offended that they ran home to get supplies to help clean it up and cut out giant paper hearts with messages of love for new immigrants. When they arrived back at the train station in the middle of the night, they saw that my colleagues who work for the system were already cleaning off the graffiti. So they decided to return in the morning and during the commute, hold up those big red paper hearts. And these are young men doing this, not the kind of men that you would expect to be holding up red paper hearts. But this really speaks to who we are as a community. And it's important for those of us who have a microphone to continue to speak to the best of who we are as a community. Because ultimately, we are all human beings. And as human beings, we owe it to one another to ensure that every single one of us in our community, every single one of us, regardless of where we come from or where we look, what we look like, regardless of how we worship, regardless of whom we love, that every single one of us in every single one of our communities has the opportunity right here, right now, to live a great life. That's the promise of humanity. It's the promise of our community. It's the promise I get to work on every single day of my life. And I'm so thrilled that you are all having this conversation so you can continue to work on that promise for your communities as well. Thank you.
E questa era la testimonianza del sindaco di Calgary.
So this was the message from the mayor of Calgary. From what I've read, he has spared no effort in this area. And he was also the very first Muslim mayor of a large Canadian city. And so get him to speak to us about what is done in Calgary and in Canada on a daily basis might be very, very useful to us. I reiterate that we have many excellent practices, and I suggest that we divide this roundtable into 3 parts. I'll start with the 2 people sitting next to me, starting off with Mario Calla, who is the Executive Director of COSTI, Immigrant Services Toronto, and Stefano Rimini, who deals with immigration for the Emilia-Romagna region. One represents the NGO, the other a public authority, and they both have to deal with everything that is necessary to facilitate immigration and the welcoming of immigrants once they arrive. As I said, they are a private entity that has a task, whereas they are a public authority whose task is to design some form of intervention and then coordinates its implementation, sometimes by NGOs as well, though they have the proprietorship of the entire action. So let's see what you do. as far as Stefano Rimini is concerned, I must say that Emilia-Romagna, jointly with Tuscany and a very few other regions, have been able to develop a method to see to it that while the refugees await the processing of their application, spend their days in ways that can be useful for their future. And they have a well-designed model for this, and it's a very good practice. So I would like you very briefly to speak to us about your work and what differences you see in your being, on the one hand, a public entity, and on the other, a non-profit NGO, and what benefits and hurdles you find. Mr. Calla.
The advantage of?
Yes.
Yeah. So my organization is a not-for-profit organization, as Stefano has said. And as such, we provide a broad range of services that are private in nature. I have a presentation, and perhaps it's best if I get into that and get to your question through it, because I think to get to your question, it's good to have some context. Okay, if you don't mind. Prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare Paul Gibbard.
At the outset, I wish to thank Paul Gibbard and Federico Soda, who have given me this chance to attend this meeting. Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here with you today because this is my country of birth. My family moved to Canada in 1958, which is quite a few years ago. It's always a pleasure to return to this country and visit with my friends and relatives. And I don't want to mix Italian and English and Calabrese, so I'll revert to English.
What I want to do in my presentation is give you an idea of an NGO, a settlement agency in Canada, and how services are delivered in Canada and the kinds of services that are delivered. My organization is called COSTI Immigrant Services, and we provide services. I'm not sure what's happening here. It's going on its own. And we provide services in the Toronto region. COSTI is actually an Italian acronym, which means Centro Organizzativo Scuole Tecniche Italiane. It was founded by the Italian community in the early 1950s. As many Italian immigrants were arriving in Canada, they found they didn't have access to English classes and jobs and housing and that sort of thing. So this was a good example of how volunteers organized through the local church and founded an organization called COSTI, which today, as you will see, we operate out of 17 locations in Greater Toronto. We serve about 39,000 people a year. We have over 100 partnerships with various organizations in the community, colleges, universities, hospitals, etc. We have about 350 staff that speak over 60 different languages, just to give you an idea of how the organization has grown from a small Italian organization to a large multicultural organization. For us, in terms of understanding what we do, you need to understand the Canadian context. As was said earlier, one of the advantages for an organization like mine, working in Canada, is that we are a country of immigrants, and as such, there is higher levels of acceptance of immigrants. There's also legislated support for multiculturalism, for the work that we do, as you can see from Multiculturalism Act, Citizenship Act. These are all legislated and so it makes our work easier. There's also people do realize the labor force requirements, that it's a population that is not replacing itself in Canada, much like the challenges you have in Italy and in Europe in general. And also the media is very supportive. They generally tell good stories about immigrants, which puts in the public mind that it's important to support immigration. So the settlement services in Canada in general are delivered by NGOs, by non-government organizations like mine. And we deliver them under contract with the federal government. We have contracts with provincial governments and also with municipalities, but this allows us great flexibility in the work we do. We're actually doing the government's work through volunteers and staff. The services are provided free to immigrants, no cost to them, and they're sorry, I can't see that. And this approach actually provides a balance of providing general services, specialized services, and through this system, there's about 160 settlement organizations in Toronto alone and about 700 across the country. To Stefano's question, the real advantage of having NGOs delivering this service, as far as I'm concerned, I'll give you the example of what we're doing right now that perhaps crystallizes this. COSTI is responsible for the settlement of the government-sponsored Syrian refugees for Toronto region. Right now, we have about 1,200 refugees in hotels in the Toronto region where we're helping them find housing and move into the community. This large arrivals for us was no way that we could do that with our staffing. We hired additional staff, but it's still very difficult. The advantage of volunteerism is that what we've done is we've organized ourselves in a way where we have 200 volunteers who take shifts to translate. Some of these refugees need to make trips to the hospital, need to go to get their bank account, and so on. If my staff had to be running with them, 1,200 of them, there's no way we could do our work. So we've got 200 volunteers who do that. We have volunteers that have organized for donations. So they collect clothes, they collect toys for the children, and they distribute them equitably to all of the refugees. We have volunteers who have organized children's programs. It's amazing. You go in to the banquet hall in this hotel, and you will see in this particular hotel we have 265 Syrian children. And you will see them there with volunteers painting their faces or doing, games and so on and so forth. So this is the real advantage, and there's a win-win, and I think Naomi was speaking about this morning, in that there's a bigger advantage in the sense that not only are the refugees getting a benefit, but the community is getting a benefit, because the community, it has built social cohesion. Everybody in the Toronto region is behind this. They want to be a part of it, and it gives them an outlet, it gives them an opportunity to actually become involved and do some good in terms of what we're doing. So to me, that is, to your question, Stefano, a real advantage of having an NGO doing this kind of work. Government could possibly get volunteers, but we have found that they're less flexible in delivering of services than NGOs are. So I'm going to give you, a long list of things that we do. It's not that important. It'll just give you an idea of the kinds of things that COSTI does and other settlement agencies. What's really important is this question here. Why settlement services? And in the 29 years that I've been doing this work at COSTI, it's clear that it's the message you're giving the immigrants. To the second bullet, in that you're saying, we welcome you. We will provide you with free English classes. We will provide you with job search and employment opportunities. We will provide you with training. We will provide you with housing search, broad range of services. But what you're actually saying is, we want you here, and it makes a big difference. And the difference it makes is the first bullet, that newcomers integrate faster because they want to be a part of a society that wants them there. It builds social cohesion because they then connect with others. And it creates greater social harmony because they're not isolating themselves. As an example, my father never integrated. Back in the 50s when he moved to Canada, those kinds of programs weren't available, and he got stuck in a job where he could communicate in Italian. And so, many, many years later, he's still stuck with, basically isolated from the rest of the community because he couldn't engage with civil society, but he was a happy man. He was connecting with family and with friends, but that was the extent of his world, right? That's not how you build a society. So this is why, the importance of building a welcoming society, the impact it has on a community. So the rest of my presentation, I will go through it very quickly, just so you have a sense of the things that we do, and certainly I'm happy to speak to you, or you can visit our website for that matter. But so we provide a broad range of services. There are ethno-specific agencies like the Afghan Women's Organization, a Somali organization, and so on. And then there are agencies like mine providing broad range of social cultural supports and services. We provide settlement counseling. We provide English language training. So we have at COSTI about 1,500 students per day accessing English classes in the Toronto region. We have housing search programs, job search workshops specifically for immigrants to understand how to do job search in Canada. There's women's support programs for elderly people, youth recreational programs, and so on. It starts overseas. Louise spoke earlier about the overseas program that she runs, so the Canadian Orientation Abroad for the refugees. And I have to say the services that I'm talking about are equally available to refugees and immigrants alike. And so there's the Canadian Orientation Abroad. We have a program where immigrants, for instance, in Shanghai, China, if they go to our Canadian visa office and are accepted to come to Canada, they're given our number so that then we can start working with them before they arrive in Canada to translate their diplomas, and degrees, so that then they can quickly start moving to look for a job, those kinds of things. And we have a refugee reception center that provides accommodation to refugees, helps them get established, finds them housing, and we move them out into the community, and then we follow them for up to a year to help them then engage with English classes, find work, etc. So the last slide was I just wanted, and I don't know why this thing is a mind of its own, but if you'll bear with me, here we go. Just to give an idea how immigration has changed in Canada, the colors aren't that great, but if you see the first bar, the period before the 1960s, basically 95+% of immigration was from Europe. And what you see is that starts to shrink, the blue bar, to the 2000s, where the brown bar is Asia. And so you can see how immigration to Canada has shifted over those years dramatically. And I would have thought that perhaps because Canada is a Eurocentric country, having been founded by the British and the French, I would have thought there would have been more problems in the integration of immigrants, but it hasn't transpired. And this just gives you an idea of the latest stats I have, the countries of origin of immigrants to Canada. So this is who we're serving through our services. In all, we get 260,000 immigrants a year in Canada and close to 30,000 refugees. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie, Mario Calla.
Thank you, Mario Calla. I'd like to call upon Stefano Rimini to briefly tell us about the model that they have developed in his region, which is called Regional Protocol on Voluntary Activities for asylum seekers. Well, whilst I was listening to Mario Calla, it came to mind that not only they represent an NGO in Canada, but they also sort of operate in a country where they have a more sort of favorable atmosphere. There are a great many positive success stories which are communicated to the public opinion. And this, of course, leads them to understand better what's the advantage of this intervention. Well, the region Emilia-Romagna used to be a region which was not sort of affected by racism, and this is somewhat changing. So I wish Stefano could tell us something about the conditions under which people operate when the climate is not so favorable. So people claim, well, you have this immigrant getting a job whilst we are having a hard time. Well, let me first of all thank the Minister, Paul Gibbard, for his invitation. And I also wish to thank the IOM mission in Italy. I'd like to convey to you the greetings of the Vice President of the region, Emilia-Romagna, Elisabetta Palmino, unfortunately could not be with us today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here this afternoon and show you my own region as an example of best practice. We're very happy to do that. It's also true that when you are viewed as one of the most advanced region when it comes to migration policies in Italy, you should not think that you should not bring yourself into question. You should try and innovate constantly your approach to migration policies. I will respond to Stefano's question later on, but in my presentation, I want to give you some hard facts. We want to first look at hard facts to better focus on the problem. Well, the figure for Emilia-Romagna on immigration are the following. The migration to Emilia-Romagna started some 25 years ago, and we've now reached a stage where we have the third generation of immigrants. We've gone through different stages. We now have 12.1% of the overall population in our region. We are a region of 4.5 million inhabitants. We have 540,000 immigrants. We are the first Italian region in terms of percentage of immigrants, and we're also the first region in terms of birth of children from foreign parents, and also in terms of children attending schools. We have attained the level of 15%. We are the first Italian region with a very high level of foreign entrepreneurs. We have 35,000 foreign entrepreneurs, and it is not by chance that we have a very strong link between the model of integration of the region and training and labor. This is just to give you a more general sort of background to what happens in the region. In the region, we've gone through different waves of migration. In the 90s, mostly were people coming from the Balkans, from Eastern European countries. The second wave of immigrants came in the year 2000, which resulted into very successful experiences in that a model was designed with respect to the sort of provision of jobs for many foreigners and to integrate them in a social context. And I'd like to quote here some sort of specific experiences that we've had with people representing foreign migrants and were elected on the local authorities. So they were those who were participating to the democratic life of the cities, and they were also members of the local authorities of the cities. In 2009, a third sort of wave of migration starts in Italy, and we have also been affected by the economic downturn, and you have this third stage of migration, which is related to the question of refugees. The first one was in 2011, and then in 2014. And this is a major challenge. I shared what the minister said at the outset. It's an unprecedented challenge. It's a global challenge. We can't think of a simple, straightforward answer to such a challenge. But we feel it is necessary to handle it, to manage it, not single-handed as a region, but together with the whole of the country and the rest of Europe. So that's where we stand now in terms of the approach to migration, and then I'll sort of then move on to the specific examples of good practices, best practices. Well, the approach that we followed is the approach enshrined in the Constitution, and that is what we followed in the regional policies that we adopted. The region has jurisdiction over health care, social policies, housing, and anti-discrimination policies. So we did not work in a sectoral manner on migration, immigration. We did not have a specific department for immigration. Immigration is something which we started considering as a fundamental for the development of the community, for social cohesion in the Emilia-Romagna region. So it's part and parcel of all policies that we undertake, that we implement, the welfare policies, the labor policies, housing policies, policies against discrimination. So it's across the board a part of all the policies that we implement in the Emilia-Romagna region. We feel that this is a major challenge, and it's only if we can properly manage immigration then we achieve a level of cohesion, which is promoting the growth of a community. So that's how we have gone about it. But in 2009 and 2010, we were up against something which was unprecedented for us. So we had to think in terms of new ways and means of achieving the governance of this development, because the economic downturn resulted into level of poverty which has doubled. The absolute extreme poverty has more than doubled in the region since 2009. So we do have a number of Italian citizens and foreign citizens that are asking for housing, for services, which they can't get because they have no job. Then, of course, the arrival of refugees. Let me move on to the best practices. But the arrival of refugees was quite impressive in terms of numbers of people coming. I think that if in 1 year you get 180,000 people coming, we in the Emilia-Romagna region, we have 6% of that many people. That certainly brings a pressure to bear on the resources available and the social cohesion in the region. What is it that we tried out to face up to that? We sort of undertook two sort of approaches to manage this phenomenon. A protocol which we signed in September last year, jointly with the representatives of municipalities and the trade union representatives and the not-for-profit sector representatives, all the NGOs and the social cooperatives, which are also related to entrepreneurial projects with a social connotation. We've also signed a protocol with the prefecture and the Ministry of the Interior, which would enable refugees and asylum seekers to be engaged in volunteer activities by cleaning up roads, painting, and touching up public buildings, and in a way, everything that could sort of provide them with an opportunity to use their time at best. It might sound trivial, but it's a major problem. For the hosting community, that was important in that it would show a taking up of responsibility on the part of asylum seeker in the region. This is something that we are pursuing as a project. We haven't as yet an outcome, a precise outcome from this protocol. We have invested 100,000 euros as Emilia-Romagna region so that we can pay the insurance coverage for volunteers working under this program. The second experience that we've had is the regional hub for early reception of migrants and refugees. We were the first Italian region to open the first regional center, which enables us to have this early reception in the capital city of the region, Bologna, of refugees coming from the coasts, and to ensure that they're being identified and subject to medical tests, to medical screening being performed in that place, and also all the formalities related to the submission of an asylum claim there, so that we can afterwards sort of distribute the refugees to all parts of the region. Before this center was established, there would be coaches going to places in small towns in the region with refugees that were being housed in hotels, and this had a major impact on the local communities. So we have sort of managed to set up this center, which can accommodate 250 refugees. It's only 250 people, and last summer, we had to accommodate 800 people. So you can feel that that is not an easy task for us. Well, in conclusion, well, the sort of the political sort of atmosphere has to do with a sort of a fight between those who are poor. We have association of second-generation immigrants that are sort of are up in arms because they claim that they're not being treated on a par with the latest arrivals. And we also have right-wing parties that are exploiting this situation, take advantage of it, with a language which is a very extreme language, emphasizing the questions that have to do with identity, with cultural differences viewed in their extreme forms, but we have a moral duty of receiving refugees. So we have to receive them as they come from this unsafe territories. We have also the moral duty to provide a suitable, decent form of reception for them. So we can't sort of accept that in this difficult economic situation, we can sort of come up with a suitable answer for each and every one. So that's how we are operating, and I think it's very interesting to hear about what is being done in Canada. There's a lot that we can learn from them. At the same time, I have the feeling that the experience we've had since 2009, the Italian and the Canadian experiences have been somewhat more far apart because of a different context, the economic downturn, migration flows that have have had a major impact on the institutions, and politicians have got to sort of deal with this in a pragmatic manner, despite all the uncertainties and the difficulties. So in the future, we feel that the role of Europe will be of the essence, and Italy's role as a country that can establish synergies with other countries, it will be key. There will be clear rules for all the regions. There should be clear rules for all the European countries, and each and every one should have to play its part in that. Thank you to Stefano. Rimini, let's change the picture. I'd like to involve Indra Perera, who's the president of CNA, Word Foreign Entrepreneurs.
Nata 7 anni fa ed è la prima associazione italiana dedicata interamente agli imprenditori.
7 years ago, and it was established to manage things for foreign entrepreneurs. Among its primary action is to represent workers, to operate as a trade union, and also to perform integration. When we speak about foreign entrepreneurship, we really focus on the success stories in spite of the economic downturn. We stress these success stories, their wish to become entrepreneurs, and sometimes they have a drive that is stronger than that of natives, native Italians. So from your standpoint, what potential do these immigrants have?
Thank you very much for the director, OIM. And this is the second correspondence which I received from the Canadian government. The first correspondence which I received, I made a petition to your Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's office replied to my letter. So this is the great, and I'm great honor to be here. And this is the second invitation. Anyway, majority of them, they are Italian, so I should like to speak to them. But whenever I had to speak to something, for example, Mrs. Louise, I would like to speak to her in English. Perché è nata Imprenditoria, Associazione di Imprenditori Immigrati?
Why did we have this organization for immigrant entrepreneurs? CNA has been established to serve small and medium-sized enterprises, and also we decided to create an offshoot that would also work for immigrants and provide them with services. We provide training in Italian to allow immigrants to understand Italian legislation. This is one of our goals. But you asked the question, why? Well, most of these small entrepreneurs used to be workers and people who were employed, and they now want to be independent, and they want to start a business of their own. So they're SMEs, they're independent, and they are also supporting the Italian economy because 14% of the Italian economy is stable thanks to the contribution of foreign enterprises. The Italian population, as part of the Italian population, now the foreign population accounts for 5 million people. And we see, however, that 60% of them cannot integrate. They have problems with the Italian language. In Canada, as Louise was saying,
Come to Canada, first thing is that the person should learn English, English, and English. You said 3 times. But we are unsuccessful in this country. And also French, yes, as a majority, and also French. But in this country, we are unsuccessful. We are not in a position to create programs for immigrants to learn Italian. I don't know how that it is continuously, noi affrontiamo continuamente questo problema.
We are constantly faced with this problem. You were speaking about children who were born in Italy. But the Italian state spends about 60,000 euros, well, 60 million euros overall for the children of immigrants. But eventually we lose them because most of them, when they grow up, emigrate elsewhere. The Sri Lankan, the Bangladeshi, the Pakistani communities live in Italy. As soon as they get their citizenship, they leave Italy. So something doesn't seem to work. We just seem to be unable to tell them what it means or to teach them what it means to be an Italian. So we provide education and then we send them to other countries. And that is certainly a negative outturn. We from the CNA have excellent relations with the Canadian government. In November last year, we established, we traveled to Toronto, and our delegation met at the Toronto Chamber of Commerce. But you have over 200,000 Italians, or perhaps more, living in Canada. So how many Canadians are there who now are official residents in Italy? 1,970. So something's wrong. Why can't we invite Canadians to Italy, get them to invest in Italy? We should see things from different angles. Italy is a wonderful country. I'd never leave. I'm in love with this country. This country is my country. I can perhaps have other opportunities elsewhere. I have dual citizenship, but I feel I'm an Italian. But I'd like to get Italian immigrants to become Italians. My wife is Italian. She's a Christian, but I'm a Buddhist. My children are Catholics. But my family is integrated. But when can integration spread? We cannot live with fundamentalism. We need to get people to understand things. People should feel that they're Italian.
This is hard, but we are not unsuccessful. We want to learn something from Canada, how that you succeeded, and the way that we would like to succeed. I would like to ask Mr. Giorgio that he said that we are also facing affrontiamo lo stesso problema come lei ha spiegato.
They have spent 5 million for 17,000 people. We have spent 3 million for how many? There is a difference. Could we have, could the speakers please use a microphone? The people who are on the table took money to do this terrible thing. They got money, and they didn't do much in Ragusa and elsewhere. There's constant fraud, and companies lend themselves to this fraudulent behavior. These are the illegal things we need to stop. There's so many foreigners who are now going back to their countries of origin. And they leave behind all the contributions, all the pension money paid by the Italian government. If there's no agreement between the two countries, they have to leave everything behind. They emigrate to Italy. They can't make a living here, and then they go back to their countries. This happens also with the people who are working in factories in northern Italy. The factories shut down, and they have to go back. The Canadians need people, but unfortunately, Italy is a peninsula, and people just can't come in by landing on the coast. And eventually, we need to accept everyone, but in the long run, it's not a good situation. We have to learn from Canada and see how we can make this a successful endeavor. Thank you, Indra Perera.
Liliana Ocmin, she is an example of integration because she was the secretary of the Confederation of the Great Trade Union, CISL. She was the first non-Italian person with a non-Italian background to attain such a position. So I would have a lot of questions to ask since she covers a great many themes in her experience, but I wish she could talk about her experience as secretary to this trade union at confederation level. I wish she could talk about the role that the trade unions can play to promote integration. Well, trade unions are active at the workplace, but also outside the workplace, so they do play a key role in society. What's her personal experience? A couple of things that she would wish to say at this stage. First of all, I'd like to thank the Canadian Embassy for their sort of sensitivity to these topics. There's a lot that we can learn from listening to what has been said here, and I'd like to thank IOM for arranging this meeting. My trade union organizations has made a choice. So my position of secretary of the that I've had has become upgraded. So I no longer am a secretary, but I'm a direct collaborator, the Secretary General of the trade union at Anna Maria Furlan. So let me say something about immigration. We came up with a policy decision that we would deal jointly with migration, women, and young people to guarantee sort of an integration process, a broader vision. One should sort of have in mind the need to avoid sort of a split vision of the labor market, and take up the challenge, which is the most topical challenge today in Italy and in Europe. Some people claim, well, that migration is no longer to be viewed as an emergency situation, but as a structural phenomenon. And some claim that the humanitarian crisis will go on for a great many years, 10 and more years. So we can't be sort of faced with an emergency without being prepared for that. as far as Italy is concerned, we need to think in terms of a specific scheme at European level. We have talked about the Dublin Treaty as a rogue treaty, if you like, because people are forced to stay in the first country where they're being identified. And we see that there has been a sort of a selfish nationalism which is prevailing in Europe. Well, if Europe wants to be the Europe, political Europe, it must live up to the situation where it is a country which is based on principles of solidarity and the respect of human rights. In terms of labor, when it comes to asylum seekers, we said that after early reception, the most important prerequisite for their integration is to be given a job. At European level, with the European unions, we have reiterated the need to do more on this front. We're also sort of working together with the International Labour Organization and some projects that would guarantee sort of enhancement of specific sort of categories of people, asylum seekers, young people and women, especially those that have these skills that should be recognized. We feel that trade unions can play a decisive role in that. Over time, we have seen how difficult it is to somewhat govern immigration. Well, immigration has been something which has been used for specific vested interest to create a sort of political support. I think that there is only one way of dealing with it. We should sort of ensure that there is empowerment given to migrants. Either migration becomes a cross-cutting theme in all policies with no separation with respect to other parts of policies, as if it were something which is part of our daily life. And so I would welcome the fight against illegality, human trafficking, and the problems which have arisen because of our sort of failures as a country. The fact that we have over 1 million caretakers in Italy, do you think it's normal? Well, this is due to the fact that there is a welfare system and it doesn't seem to work. There are no specific policies for lack of self-sufficiency. So in this vacuum, immigration has become a sort of a prosthesis of the labor market. Some claim that migrants have turned out to be very useful in this respect. But I think that the true challenge is that of sort of taking up these problems. We are in trouble to provide governance. There is no longer a ministry that would work on integration with other government departments. The theme of migration is tied in with different competences. With the asylum seekers, this has been further complicated because the resources, there's a shortage of resources, and there is no way of dealing with all these problems altogether. So if you are in Italy where there are no sort of regular channels for the entry into the country, sort of gives more opportunity to smugglers and human traffickers. In a country that doesn't have a guarantee of regular migration flows, this used to be a taboo in recent years. We know, for instance, that there's some courses were organized just as a front for a policy which would basically disguise regularization of migrants. One would sort of issue a contract for a person that lived across the Atlantic that could come here because of that. When you hear about the positive experiences of Canada, and I have a personal experience that I have a cousin that in a 5-year time he has gone through a long sort of process of training, etc. And now he's a Canadian citizen. I've been here for a very long time. I've been studying here, and that clearly shows what the problems are here in Italy. In Italy, we have to overcome the problems of citizenship and a reform of citizenship rules. This might be sort of a way to pave the ground for sort of a better way of dealing with the problems of migration. Italians are not racist. Sometimes you have this ignorance which generates xenophobia and racism. I'm quite convinced, and I must be convinced of that. I have 3 kids that were born here. I love my nation, the country of origin of my husband, Sicily. We know that there are so many problems in the southern part of Italy, so I'm very linked and close to this country. But if the question of immigration is not linked to the empowerment and the right to custody and voted administrative elections, well, then we'll sort of call on voters that will be involved in this process of social mobility. When we talk about integration, you can't issue a decree whereby you achieve integration. You need the proper laws, but you need a shared responsibility, a process of mobility and granting of opportunities. Something else that we could say that speaks to the fact that this is not the right time for Italy. You have Italian young people that leave the country because they feel that there is no future for them in the country of origin. So we have to help the country. We must all sort of join forces to create the opportunities that are needed and try and do away with the widespread illegality and exploitation. This is something that must be fought against. And this will be a guarantee for a better future for everyone. Thank you, Liliana Ocmin.
This morning, I attended or I visited a project for the rehabilitation of a problem school. And in one of these schools, 35% of students were of foreign origin, and that was the problem. And one really can't understand why it was a problem. But at least that's the way in which these things are construed. And Italy's delay in considering immigration as an opportunity and not a problem is linked to the second generation children, because they're foreign and they're not foreign. They were born here from foreign parents, but they've been living in Italy. They can speak with a Roman accent, a very strong one too. So it's very interesting to have with us Ireneo Spencer, who is a member of one of the G2 young people, the second generation people. It's one of the many organizations that have been active, have tried to operate on many different fronts. I'm not mentioning citizenship because they have come up with a manifesto that speaks of school participation, active citizenship, sports, etc. But I'm setting aside citizenship for the time being. If I were in your shoes, I would be torn between being an activist, a second-generation Italian, who works in associations, who sets goals for himself, to tries to overcome discrimination, improve attitudes, and doing nothing at all. Because you're not supposed to do anything. Everything should come to you naturally. So the activism of young G2s, has it been effective? Is it still meaningful? Because there's a dilemma here. And I often wonder what the situation is like for someone such as you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the minister and the Canadian Embassy and the IOM for their invitation. I'm very happy to see so many representatives, even of the Sant'Egidio community. They're part of my background for many years. They were one of the first communities that were forthcoming, and they worked with Caritas. So AS Rome is a sporting society with young people from many different countries and backgrounds. Some people from Cape Verde, Brazil, Argentina, Morocco. It's a wonderful mix of people who were either born or who grew up in Italy, and at some point had lost their bearings, because we've all grown up with the first generation that fought to set up their associations and find a place in society. And there's still so much to be done. Now, it's no longer a second generation. We're already into the third generation, and there will soon be a fourth. But if I look at what the Italian state has done and comparing with what Canada has done and is doing, I like what the government shape-up is there. So how are we acting? Well, some of us are students. I have a degree that I just got in architecture and restoration. But we have a lot of people who have legal experience, and we've come together to get ourselves noticed. It's no longer a problem of 35% of students in a school. When I started, I think I was the only little black spot in my school, and even when I was at university. Now things have changed, but the problem is still that we have foreigners in our schools. But it should be a matter of pride. And we should also feel proud of being Italian and remain here and not go elsewhere seeking jobs. So on a very small scale, through flash mobs, going out into the streets, getting people involved, Italians, immigrants, and dealing with burning issues of the time that have to do with the Italian context. We have tried to get policymakers involved. We organized an event getting the right and left involved on the issue of youth and how we can all work together for a better future. Obviously, we've tried to knock on the doors of the regions, of local authorities, with suggestions and proposals. I don't think we should only be mediators, but certainly we witness the situations that affect us. So there could be a good collaboration between us and create perhaps a desk at the national level. Of course, this is all about Rome. We operate well, why Rome? Because Rome, we said, is the capital of Italy, where everybody migrates, not only from the rest of the world, but also students from the north, the south, from other cities in Italy to study. And as you said earlier, together with other associations, trying to set up networks with a great deal of networking. There's strength in numbers. So we've tried to stand united. And thanks to the Ministry of Labor and Social Policies and the Migrants Portal, we have tried to look at the 4 issues. Schools, of course, become a focal point. And as I said, I had this own personal experience of having teachers who, since you are of so-and-so origins, then you are thought to be a slow learner. So we've tried to look at the importance of training teachers, training trainers, those teachers who have multicultural classes, and provide school support, counseling, mediation, support from families that often do not speak Italian yet. And so young people need to find schools where they have some support, and also establish an integrated system of guidance, guidance from the transition from schools to the workplace. And then labor. Labor is fundamental, because when guidance is given at schools, I was told, well, he's only eligible for a 2-year training course because he wouldn't be able to finish high school. And of course, I became very withdrawn after that, because that's what happens to young people. So I tried to find some strength in my family, but I realize now that I have finished my university. I will now sit for a state exam before I can exercise my profession. So I think this is a life itinerary that many of us share. So sport and culture can be useful. It's important to speak of one's origin, even if one was born in Italy, because I speak Portuguese and Italian, and my father speaks Creole and Dutch. So I think it's important to get people involved. Yes, citizenship, but we shouldn't think only about that. We need to be Italian regardless of the color of our skins. Just to quickly sum up the situation and show you this brief video to depict what happens to us daily.
Sorry, we have with us Cardinal Veglio. maybe we can take a look at your spot after the presentation of the Cardinal.